Is that you, Kash Patel, reposting that at the top of that page?
Senator, I had nothing to do with the creation of that
Is
meme,
that you reposting it was my question.
and that's me at the top.
Senator Whitehouse walked into that hearing room with a single piece of paper on it, a direct quote, Kash Patel's own words made publicly about what he planned to do to journalists and government officials he considered enemies. "We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly." Whitehouse turned to Patel and asked him one question. Is that a correct quotation? Patel had two choices, deny it or confirm it. He confirmed it. "Senator, that's a partial quotation, but it's correct in part. Correct in part. Not taken out of context, not misattributed." His words, confirmed under oath in front of the entire Senate Judiciary Committee. And that was just the beginning, because Whitehouse didn't come with one document. He came with a case, a judge's written ruling, Republican officials on record, an enemies list, and he walked through all of it, one by one, with Patel sitting right there across the table. Watch what happened when a senator arrives fully prepared and the man across from him has nowhere to go. Let me tell you who Sheldon Whitehouse is. He's a Democratic senator from Rhode Island. Before he came to the Senate, he served as the Attorney General of Rhode Island and as a U.S. attorney. He spent years prosecuting cases and building legal arguments in court. He's not a politician who performs for cameras. He's a lawyer who constructs a case methodically, piece by piece. And when he sits down in a hearing room, he has done the work beforehand. He doesn't arrive with talking points. He arrives with documents, with exact quotes, with dates and names and judicial findings. Kash Patel had never served a single day as an FBI agent before taking the role. He had worked in Trump's first administration, served as a congressional staffer on the House Intelligence Committee, and spent years publicly attacking the very institution he was now running. He had written a book listing his perceived enemies in government. He had appeared on dozens of podcasts. He had made statements, many of them, that his critics had carefully catalogued. The hearing room was packed. Outside in the hallway, supporters had been waiting in line for hours. Inside, Republican senators sat ready to defend their man. Democrats sat quietly and waited their turn. Whitehouse had a plan. He had Patel's exact words pulled from his book and his public appearances. He had the names of Republican officials, Trump's own people, who had gone on record against Patel. He had a written ruling from a sitting federal judge about Patel's credibility under oath. He had all of it. And he started not with Patel, but with January 6th. Whitehouse opened not with an attack, but with a warning. Not about Patel directly, but about the political moment they were all living through and what it meant for everything happening in that room. He described January 6th from the inside. Colleagues running through the halls of the Capitol building, trying to flee. A Republican colleague shouting that the rioters should be shot. Senators eventually returning to their constitutional duties through corridors that had been cleared by SWAT teams carrying automatic weapons. And then he made a point that was simple but difficult to dismiss. For a long time after that day, not a single senator from either party had called for pardoning the people who stormed the building. A Republican colleague called the idea hard to believe, even absurd. J.D. Vance said the violent rioters should not be pardoned. Jim Jordan said any pardons should be limited strictly to people who had not committed violence. Then Trump pardoned all of them, all 1,500. More than 600 of those individuals had physically attacked Capitol police officers. They were released and put back on the street. And Whitehouse said something that landed quietly but with weight. Every time you think Trump would never go that far, rethink that. He then brought up a separate pardon that had received far less public attention. A dark web operator who had been sentenced to life in prison for running an illegal drug marketplace online. A man accused of soliciting murders for hire. Trump pardoned him too. These decisions are not random, Whitehouse said. They are a signal that the rules have changed, that we have entered a strange and dangerous time. And that warning about what this administration was willing to do was the foundation he was building before he said a single word directly about Patel. Then Whitehouse did something that was deliberate and clearly thought through in advance. He didn't cite Democrats. He didn't quote liberal critics or opposition voices. He read into the record what Republicans, the people who had actually worked alongside Patel, had said about him. Former Attorney General Bill Barr, a Trump loyalist and one of the most consequential law enforcement officials in recent Republican history, said that Patel had virtually no experience that would qualify him to serve at the highest level of the world's preeminent law enforcement agency. Barr also said Patel would never be able to command the respect necessary to run the day-to-day operations of the Bureau. That's Bill Barr. Former CIA Director Gina Haspel, another Trump appointee, was reported to have threatened to resign rather than allow Patel to serve under her. John Bolton, Trump's own former national security advisor, said he did not think Patel was qualified for the roles he had been given and stated plainly that he had been forced to hire him. And then, White House quoted Trump's own deputy national security advisor, the person who had been Patel's direct supervisor inside the administration. This person said, and White House read the words carefully, "His ideas are ludicrous. He is absolutely unqualified for this job. He is untrustworthy, and it is an absolute disgrace to even consider an individual of this nature." White House made sure the committee absorbed what had just been put into the record. These were not opposition voices. These were senior Republican officials, Trump administration veterans, people who had sat in rooms with Patel, worked alongside him, supervised him, and watched how he operated. Every single one of them had gone on record against him. White House paused. Then he turned to what Patel had said in his own words. White House read from a direct quote. Patel had made public statements about what he intended to do with journalists and perceived government enemies. The words were specific and unambiguous. "We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly." White House turned to Patel and asked him a straight question. "Is that a correct quotation?" Patel answered, "Senator, that's a partial quotation, but it's correct in part. Correct in part." He did not deny the substance. He confirmed the words were his. White House moved on. He brought up a threatening video. White House asked him directly, "Is that you reposting that at the top of that page?" Patel said he had nothing to do with creating it, but when pressed, he confirmed it was him in the video, and he confirmed he had reposted it. Then White House raised a claim Patel had made publicly that FBI agents themselves had been responsible for the violence on January 6th. Beyond a reasonable doubt, Patel had said. The Inspector General of the Department of Justice investigated that specific claim. The conclusion was that it was false. White House stated that plainly and moved on. He then addressed Patel's public calls to impeach federal judges who had ruled against Donald Trump. Patel had described those judges using his own language, political terrorists. Each point was placed on the record in sequence. White House didn't pause to editorialize between them. He stated the fact, gave Patel the opportunity to respond, confirmed what he could, and moved immediately to the next one. The method was deliberate. He wasn't trying to embarrass Patel in a single exchange. He was building a record. The accumulation was the argument. Then White House produced what may have been the sharpest single piece of evidence in his entire statement. It wasn't a quote from a podcast. It wasn't a second-hand account from a colleague. He told the committee that Patel had testified under oath before a Colorado federal judge presiding over a Trump-related case in which Patel appeared as a witness. That judge reviewed Patel's testimony line by line and committed a finding to writing. The judge concluded that Patel was not a credible witness. The judge's written assessment stated that his testimony was not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. White House read those words deliberately and without commentary. Not a credible witness. Illogical. Completely devoid of any evidence. That is not a political characterization. That is a federal judge's written finding about sworn testimony delivered in a court of law. White House let it register. Then he said what the entire statement had been building toward. There is an unfathomable difference, he told the committee, between the facade being constructed around this man in this hearing room and what he has actually done and said in the real world when left to his own devices. Conduct shows character. 4 words. He said them quietly and he let them stand on their own. White House closed with something larger than the hearing itself. He didn't end with another quote or another piece of evidence. He reached into history. He said that if you study what has happened in other countries and other political periods, a recognizable pattern emerges in how authoritarian systems operate, specifically in how the people placed in charge of security services tend to behave and what they are willing to do for whoever holds power. He listed the qualities that tend to define those figures. They are vengeful, they are grandiose, they are intemperate, they are blindly loyal to whoever holds power, and they are servile. They do not push back, they do not draw lines, they do not say no. White House said he was afraid that the documented record of Patel's own public conduct raised exactly those warnings. He was not making a direct accusation. He was laying out a pattern, making the comparison explicit, and asking his colleagues to weigh it seriously before casting their votes. The room was quiet when he finished. Patel sat at the witness table and said nothing. White House yielded his remaining time. When the votes were eventually counted, only 2 Republicans broke with their party, Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. Collins said in a written statement that there is a compelling need for a leader at the FBI who is decidedly apolitical. Murkowski said her reservations came directly from Patel's own prior political activities. Both women were the only Republicans willing to put that on the record. The enemies list. Whitehouse had referenced in the hearing, documented in a book Patel authored called Government Gangsters, named roughly 60 individuals he had identified as targets. Whitehouse later estimated that Patel had already taken some form of adverse action against 20 of them. And that is the part that still hangs over Washington long after the hearing ended. Because confirmation hearings are supposed to answer one basic question: what kind of person is about to receive enormous power? Whitehouse wasn't arguing that Patel had made a single mistake. He wasn't pointing to one bad interview or one reckless statement taken out of context. He was presenting a pattern, a long public record, built from Patel's own words, his own actions, his own reposts, his own promises, and the judgments of people who had worked closest to him. That was the real weight of the hearing, not the interruptions, not the political theatre, not the headlines that flashed across cable television for a few hours and disappeared. It was the accumulation, one document after another, one quote after another, one warning after another. And through nearly all of it, Patel never fully pushed back on the core facts being presented. He didn't deny the quotation about going after journalists. He confirmed it in part. He didn't deny reposting the video. He acknowledged that he had. He didn't dispute that a federal judge had declared him not credible under oath. That ruling already existed in writing. That is what made the exchange so unusual. In Washington hearings, politicians often argue endlessly over interpretation. They challenge wording. They attack motives. They accuse the other side of distortion. But Whitehouse structured the hearing carefully enough that Patel often wasn't arguing about interpretation at all. He was left responding to his own documented record. And the deeper Whitehouse went, the more the hearing stopped feeling like a partisan clash and started feeling like a prosecutor laying out evidence piece by piece before a jury. Even Whitehouse's tone reflected that approach. He rarely raised his voice. He didn't rush. He didn't try to dominate the room emotionally. In some ways, that made the presentation more effective. Every quote was delivered slowly. Every document was introduced deliberately. Every transition felt calculated. Because Whitehouse understood something important about Senate hearings, the most damaging moments are often not the loudest ones. They are the moments where there is no easy response. The hearing also exposed something larger happening inside American politics. A growing divide not simply between Democrats and Republicans, but between Republicans themselves. Because many of the harshest warnings against Patel did not come from the political left. They came from Trump's own former officials, people who had served in the administration, people who had defended Trump publicly for years, people with direct first-hand experience working alongside Patel behind closed doors. Bill Barr, Gina Haspel, John Bolton, former national security officials, former intelligence officials, former law enforcement officials. One after another, figures from inside Trump's orbit had raised concerns about Patel's judgment, temperament, qualifications, or credibility. That created a problem difficult for Republicans on the committee to fully dismiss. These were not outside critics attacking from a distance. These were insiders. And Whitehouse knew exactly how powerful that distinction was. At one point during the hearing, you could almost feel two separate realities colliding in the room. On one side was the version of Patel presented by his allies. Loyal, aggressive, anti-establishment, willing to fight what they viewed as corruption inside federal institutions. On the other side was the version Whitehouse laid out, a man who had publicly threatened opponents, spread unsupported claims, attacked judges, maintained an enemies list, and been declared not credible by a federal judge reviewing sworn testimony. Those are two radically different pictures of the same person. And Whitehouse forced the committee to confront both at the exact same time. That is why the hearing mattered beyond one nomination. It became a test of what standards still exist for people placed in positions of immense institutional power. Because the FBI director is not a symbolic role. The position oversees one of the most powerful law enforcement and intelligence organizations in the world. The decisions made there affect surveillance, investigations, prosecutions, national security operations, and public trust in the justice system itself. Whitehouse's argument was ultimately simple. If someone has publicly demonstrated vindictive behavior, contempt toward critics, hostility toward judges, and willingness to target perceived enemies, should that person control an institution with enormous investigative power? That was the question underneath every document he introduced. And even after the hearing ended, that question didn't disappear. It followed senators into the vote. It followed reporters into press conferences. It followed the administration into the next news cycle. Because once statements are entered into the congressional record, they do not vanish. The quotes remain, the testimony remains, the written findings remain, and perhaps most importantly, the video remains. People could watch Patel confirm parts of the quotations himself. They could watch the hearing unfold in real time. They could judge the responses with their own eyes. That matters because political memory in Washington is often short. Controversies move quickly. Outrage cycles reset every few days. But official records last much longer than headlines. Years from now, people may still go back and look at that hearing for one reason. It captured a rare moment where a senator systematically confronted a nominee using the nominee's own documented public history, line by line, under oath, in front of the entire country. And for long stretches of that exchange, the room had very little to say back. What made the entire confrontation even more striking was the timing. Patel was not some fringe commentator speaking from outside government anymore. He was no longer a podcast guest throwing out inflammatory lines to excite an audience online. He was sitting before the Senate, seeking control over an institution whose authority reaches into nearly every corner of American public life. That changed the meaning of every prior statement. Words that might once have been dismissed as political rhetoric suddenly carried a different weight when attached to someone preparing to oversee federal investigations, intelligence operations, and national security matters. Whitehouse understood that shift completely. That is why he kept returning to the same theme over and over again. Conduct shows character, not branding, not loyalty, not television appearances. Conduct. And throughout the hearing, he kept pulling the discussion back to documented behaviour. The reposted videos, the comments about journalists, the attacks on judges, the unsupported claims about January 6th, the enemies list, the judge's ruling, each item alone could be debated politically. But together, Whitehouse argued, they revealed something deeper about how Patel viewed power itself. That was the real concern underneath the questioning, not whether Patel was conservative, not whether he supported Trump, not whether he opposed the FBI leadership during previous administrations. Washington has seen partisan FBI directors before. It has seen ideological appointees before. That alone was not what made the hearing extraordinary. The issue Whitehouse raised was whether Patel viewed institutions as something independent from personal loyalty, or whether he viewed them as weapons to be directed against enemies. And that distinction matters enormously in democratic systems. Because once law enforcement agencies begin operating primarily through personal loyalty instead of institutional restraint, the entire balance of government changes. That was the historical warning Whitehouse referenced near the end of his remarks. He was careful with his wording. He never directly declared that Patel would abuse power. Instead, he pointed to historical patterns that emerge when leaders place deeply loyal figures in control of security services. And the silence in the room afterward suggested that everyone understood exactly what he was saying. Even the structure of the hearing reflected how seriously Whitehouse approached it. He didn't rely heavily on speculation. He didn't spend most of his time predicting what Patel might do in the future. Instead, he focused relentlessly on what Patel had already done, publicly and voluntarily. Subscribe for daily political coverage because the enemies list is still active. The threat against journalists was never walked back. And the judge's finding not a credible witness eyes.